Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe.
Hey guys, this is Britt with Pure Athlete. Hope you're having a great week. Well, this is the last week that we're offering our spring merchandise collection. So go on pureathleteinc.com and order yours by Friday. Thanks for supporting us.
Back to Pure Athlete. And guys, what a great time today with Dr. Joel Seedman. He was, I think, gave some great insight on things that, you know, you hear different strength guys talk about power, this and that. But I think what was so cool is he was talking about, if you don't have right posture and right form, none of that's going to matter. And he said, in fact, that's why a lot of these kids tend to getting hurt because they're doing it the wrong way.
Yep. Yeah, I really, he starts off and he gives a lot of scientific talk and language and stuff, but hang in there with us because he really breaks down into some really very specific things that I think are really relevant for parents of young athletes and for the young athletes themselves.
Yeah, he gives a really interesting take on flexibility. So I think they'll enjoy that as well.
Another tease.
Another tease.
Another tease. Look at that. And I'll tell you this, he was in studio with us, so looking over, I just kept seeing the vein and the bicep muscle, so that was pretty impressive.
Britt's kind of like me.
Britt's biceps or his biceps?
And he also said Britt's posture was bad.
Yeah,
so
we all knew that.
That was you who said that, but the audience will hear it in just a moment.
Oh, enjoy the episode. Before we get to the podcast, if you have middle school or high school kids that play sports and you don't want to fundraise like me, we got you covered. My buddy Chris Carson owns Booster. Chris?
We help schools and sports teams raise funds in a super fun and engaging way. In fact, the last 22 years, we've raised $750 million, and we can't wait to help you. Choose booster.com.
Welcome back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff Francoeur along with Britt and Brad, and we have a great guest for you today. We've done, guys, different things with athletes, coaches, and all this, but we also like to be able to kind of go a little deeper and talk about the development of athletes, not just from a skill set, but from other things. So today we have Dr. Joel Seedman on, who is 15 years in performance trainings of youth, amateur, even professional athletes, and CEO of Advanced Human Performance. So we'll call you doctor at first, and then if you want, Joel, because you've earned it. But thanks for joining us, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show. It's actually updated. It's actually about 20 to 21 years in this industry now. It's coaching athletes and whatnot.
So there you go. Great job, Brett.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you just miss your PhD in kinesiology?
I did.
Yeah.
I was close, but then I decided to play baseball. So I was like,
Hey, I never planned on doing a PhD. I swore off school after my master's. I was like, that's it. No more. This is done. I told my parents, my friends, I'm like, no more schooling. And hey, after a few years, I was like, you know what? I wanted to find out more answers about, strength training and my journey and kind of what I was looking for. And that was that. So
there you go.
It ended up being a little more than I had planned.
Yeah, I don't have time for that anymore. I got 4 kids, 10 and under, man. Those days have passed. But let the audience know a little bit before we kind of get into things, just about you, your background, and how you got into what you're doing.
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate and master's degree in kinesiology at Indiana University. And during that time, I was basically personal training and doing strength and conditioning with the different teams there. And it was pretty cool because I actually had a chance to take what I was learning in the classroom and apply it to athletes. And so it was basically, I would learn things and I would try it on myself and then work with the different coaches and trainers. And basically, I wasn't using anyone as a guinea pig, but I got to firsthand take the knowledge that I was learning in the classroom and be able to apply it. So that was kind of my learning ground and where I really got my feet wet in the industry. But after about 24, 25 years old, my body really started to break down. And I saw some trends in my clients and athletes as well, like things that we were doing that even though they were by the books and even though this is what the experts and the textbooks were saying that we should do, why was my body breaking down? I was only 24, 25 years old. Why were some of my athletes experiencing similar things. And so it got me thinking, well, maybe some of what has been recommended in the, textbooks and by the so-called experts, maybe we need to rethink some of that. And that's where I decided to kind of look more at the research for myself with a blank canvas rather than having other people interpret it for me. And I started doing a little bit more investigation, a little bit more research on my own. That led me to doing my PhD. And, now I have my own business working with athletes. So, it's pretty much a summary of what it's been for me the last 15, 20 years.
So that's really cool. And I think, there's a lot of folks out there doing training across the country, but we asked you to come on because, you are a serious dude about all of this stuff. And you're doing a lot of unique things here in Atlanta, but working with a lot of pro athletes across a wide variety of sports, a lot of college athletes and high school athletes. And so we thought, you were perfect for our audience to share some things that people are wrestling with their young kids. So tell us a little bit about your approach and, your facility and who you're seeing and what kind of differentiates what you guys are doing.
Yeah, obviously I'm a bit biased in terms of what we do, but I'm really into training smart, not just training hard. Now, training hard is critical, and I think that every athlete needs to have the ability and the willpower and the mental discipline to be able to train hard. But I think just about every elite level athlete can do that for the most part. But training intelligently, training strategically, understanding why they're doing different protocols, and not just pushing their body as hard as they can, but understanding, hey, it's all about quality of movement, not just quantity of movement. So we really focus on biomechanics. We really focus on refining movement patterns and taking an athlete and examining where they might have some compensation patterns, imbalances, activation deficits, areas of weakness where maybe they're forfeiting some force production or they're leaking energy, so to speak, and maybe that's impacting their running technique or their pitching or throwing or hitting, whatever it may be. And we start cleaning that up in the weight room because let's face it, correcting athletic mechanics when it's happening rapidly on the playing field, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. It can be done, but it takes a long time. The shortcut is correcting their biomechanics in the weight room, because if something isn't firing correctly, you can try to fix their running form, their hitting form, but you're kind of hitting your head against the wall, because it's like, well, shoot, man, their core, if you want their core to turn on when they're hitting, if they don't even know how to turn it on during a plank, good luck trying to get that core musculature to turn on when they're swinging a bat or throwing a baseball or whatever it may be. So that's one of the things that we work on. It's not just getting them bigger and stronger. That comes, but the most important thing is working on their biomechanics, making sure that their fundamental movement patterns are locked in, and then everything else improves, and including their strength and size.
I got a quick question real quick, so sometimes you go in and you might have 12 girls, 12 guys in a workout thing together. Like, how beneficial is that compared to, because like you just said, like every athlete's different, like my core compared to these two guys is off the charts.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Nice.
So like if they come
You're
see
moving
us,
over a low bar.
99th percentile, I guess. Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, you get lumped in sometimes. It's like, obviously each athlete's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you probably have one that needs, like you said, more core work or maybe more upper body, or depending what sport they're trying to. So how do you differentiate that?
Well, there's a few things. We're kind of talking also about, group training versus one-on-one training. I do a combination. I do prefer one-on-one training just so I can get as meticulous and as detailed as possible with the athlete. And, that's why they come to me, is to basically help fix things or to show them where they're kind of missing out on certain elements of their performance. With that said, I can take a decent sized group, 10, 12, 15 people. And if the coach is, pretty competent, they should be able to touch on 80 to 90%. That last 10% though, which for some athletes can be pretty important, that's where some of those one-on-one sessions can be valuable. But, interesting question you asked about, the difference between athletes, and obviously every athlete is different. Every sport is different.
Yeah.
Even positions within sports are different. However, when it comes to training, it actually starts to get more similar than you would think, particularly when we're talking, correcting someone's fundamental movement patterns. every athlete needs to know how to squat properly, hinge properly, lunge properly, horizontal push and pull, vertical push and pull, core stabilization, rotational patterns. And it really doesn't matter what sport that is. Some of those things stay very similar. Now, with that said, I always say 80% of what I do with all my athletes is roughly the same. 20% of it, we start to get more specific as they get more advanced. But at first, you'd be surprised. A lot of my athletes, their training looks similar. Now, as you mentioned too, depending on the athlete, they might have more of a core weakness. They might have more of a, maybe they had ACL reconstruction. So we have to focus more on lower body, but I still like to address the entire athlete, and the entire athlete needs certain fundamental movement patterns, and they need to be done with pretty precise protocols. So
Joel, you talked about some pretty heady stuff there, used a lot of terminology that some of our audience probably aren't familiar with. Yeah. So I'm curious, like you said, it's really critical that you learn to do all these things the right way. Why? I mean,
yeah, because how we move in the weight room directly reflects and impacts how we move on the field. So if I'm squatting with my knees caving in, my ankles pronating, my spine collapsing, guess what? That's going to be happening probably to a more subtle degree on the field. And so, and like I said, if you really want to fix those issues, fix it in the weight room, because in the weight room, we can slow things down big time. We can focus on one rep at a time, and we can deconstruct the rep, and we can do it in a slow, controlled fashion and really get things to start turning on that maybe weren't activating before. And then once things are firing correctly, trying to get the athlete to do the same thing when they're running or hitting or throwing or jumping, it becomes a lot easier.
So, Joel, you wrote a book called Movement Redefined. And so would you say, like, first of all, could you define movement for us? And is that the most important thing when you consider like the success of an athlete? Is it movement? Is movement another word for explosiveness, or can you kind of define it for us?
Yeah. So for me, when I'm looking at movement, it's about quality of movement. So like having someone walk, I can tell a pretty good amount about how their body functions. If their feet are rotated out, if they have forward head tilt, if their, lumbar back is, severely extended, if their core is not firing, you can see all these things when someone's walking. And then you start getting them to do things under higher force, higher load scenarios, higher impact. Well, those things become even more magnified. And so, when I take an athlete now, I basically have them do about a 5-minute assessment. It used to be way longer. And over the years, I've just cut that down more and more, because honestly, watch them just do a few basic movements and you can tell exactly what's going on in their body. I mean, it's so common now because the way that strength and conditioning has trickled down from the sports of powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting, which to me is not optimal, because those sports of weightlifting and powerlifting, the way they train are great for those sports. Yeah. But they're not always great for other sports. For example, squatting, it's called ass-to-grass. Hopefully I can say that on here, but ATG or deep full range of motion squats, that's great for the sport of Olympic weightlifting, because the deeper they catch it, the more their PRs go up, because their weights are so heavy, they got to be able to get under the load as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Also, the sport of powerlifting, you basically have to reach a certain depth or you get what they call a red light. You don't get it doesn't count. So those are great for those sports, but those have nothing to do with what's optimal biomechanics for pretty much everything else. Because for an athlete, when are they going to be significantly below 90-degree joint angles? And if they're training at those deep joint angles, not only are they breaking their joints down and their cartilage, but they're reinforcing these movement patterns that have excessive range of motion, so that even when they go and sprint, they're more likely to overstride. They're more likely to breach those 90-degree positions. That's how athletes pull things. It's so common with all the athletes we train. The ones that do a ton of stretching for the hamstrings are the ones that are always pulling their hamstrings, because they actually have too much range of motion. So you look at them squat, you look at them do a hip hinge, a lunge, they just don't have good stability. They don't have good motor control. And when I say motor control, it's basically what it sounds like. They don't have good control of their body to be able to stabilize it. And as a result, their balance, their stability is off, and they have all these compensation patterns. So again, you take that athlete, having them run, jump, throw, like, you're going to see all kinds of issues. And the best way to correct that, in my opinion, is first in the weight room, and then it makes the position coaches or skills coaches' job that much easier.
So would you be more in favor of like more reps, less weight? It depends what age.
So
I guess.
I would say less weight at first and less reps, because it's all about quality and slowing the movement down. So like when people come to me, and this is in my book that I talk about, it's all over my website, people, or even social media. I do something called like a 90-degree eccentric isometric protocol. And all that means is basically we're slowing down the eccentric phase of movement. Eccentric means the lowering phase. So on a squat or a bench press, that's where I lower myself to roughly 90 degrees and I pause and hold it. And that lowering phase, rather than just letting the weight free fall, I'm controlling that. Now we could get more into the science, but I think the audience probably doesn't want to hear too much of that. But the eccentric phase, that lowering phase, not only is the most beneficial for muscle growth and for strength and for promoting power, but it's also the phase that allows us to clean up our body mechanics. Okay. And it's also the position, ironically, where you have the most injuries. So it's kind of like this sweet spot that a lot of athletes and coaches overlook, but there's so much we can glean from that and gain and benefit from that. So oftentimes for my athletes, we're doing super low reps with pretty light weight at first. So we might just do a set of 3 squats. That's it. Perfect body weight squats, because they have to be able to do that first. If they can't body weight squat, I'm not going to load a bar in their back. Okay. And if they know, hey, I have 3 reps and I need to focus every bit of attention and cognitive resources on just nailing each rep one at a time, well, guess what happens? Their quality of movement goes up. Whereas if I say, hey, let's go just do a set of 12 or 15 reps, they're looking at that like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go through this rapidly and just, blast these out. That's not the mindset we want to have, particularly for young athletes who can get a little bit antsy and maybe their attentional capacity is not as high as, say, a pro athlete. So a lot of what we do is in the 2 to 5 rep range with light or moderate weight, but the reps take 2 to 3 times the duration of what a traditional rep takes. So, and it's all about time under tension too. Your muscles are stupid. They don't know whether you're doing 12 reps or 2 reps. They know time under tension. So if it's 20 to 30 seconds of really intense, constant tension muscular contractions, you just created a great stimulus for muscle growth. But if you do it slowly, you also created a great stimulus for refining their movement patterns.
So I'm curious, for young kids and teens who aren't doing a lot of this stuff, is the primary benefit injury prevention, or is it performance maximization?
Yeah. So one of the things in the field of kinesiology that we're seeing more and more, at least in my opinion, with competent coaches, is that the line between kind of prehab and injury prevention and athletic performance, it's becoming a little bit more blurred, and they're really starting to become one and the same as they should be. Because as we do a protocol that's going to help with injury prevention, it should simultaneously improve strength. It should simultaneously improve power. Because if you improve someone's body mechanics, if you eliminate energy leaks, let's say they're doing a squat and their knees cave in. Well, when they jump, their knees are also caving in. When they're running, when their foot lands, they're probably having some ankle pronation and knee valgus collapse. Well, they're sacrificing speed, they're sacrificing power, and they're also placing a lot of tension on their knees. So when we clean the squat up, guess what we're doing? We're improving their power output. We're improving their strength. We're improving their muscle growth, because now we're activating the musculature properly, but we're also improving their body mechanics that's going to transfer into pretty much everything else that they do. So proper training protocol, you could really argue that it should kind of touch on all those things. Now, you can obviously customize it, and if the athlete's really locked in, they're healthy, okay, well, let's start pushing the weight more while at the same time making sure their body mechanics stay locked in. So it does vary a little bit from athlete to athlete, but those are just kind of some of the general principles that we use.
So let's get to the question that a lot of parents, and including myself, want to know sometimes, like, what about age? When should you start to bring an 8-year-old in? Are we wasting our time? If all of a sudden my kid is going through puberty and they get on the other side, is that like, when's an optimal time to really get some of that stuff going where you don't feel like we're just wasting?
Yeah. Probably, it's funny because the longer I train, the more I keep changing this answer, and the younger the age actually keeps getting. So it used to be, I wouldn't train anyone under 15 or 16 years old. And then it got to the point where I'd have some, parents come to me and be like, hey, would you please train my athletes? Even just, do one session and see what you think. If you still think it's not going to be effective, then we don't have to do anymore. So I had this scenario happen several years ago with a few parents, and they wanted me to train their 12-year-old baseball players, their 2 sons. And I was like, I don't know that, I don't really.
You don't want to open that can of worms.
Exactly. But I was like, all right, we'll try a session, see how it goes. They did great. They were really focused. They were really into it. And so, I kind of changed my mindset a little bit after that. And then I currently have a couple that I train. Well, they have a young daughter, and, I've been training them for years, and she's 8. And all of a sudden one day she wanted to jump in and do a few things. I was like, all right, she can jump in. I was like, wow, she's really into this. She's incredibly focused, more focused than a lot of teenagers that I see. So she trains with her parents now. She's 8 years old. I think she just turned 9, and she does a great job. So my answer to that is it all depends on how mentally focused the individual is. Some kids are a little bit more rambunctious at 8, 9, 10 years old, and maybe, this type of training might not be suitable for them, or they might not be ready for it. But as soon as they're at the age where they can focus enough on technique and skill to the point where they can actually do the movements properly, there's really no too young. And again, I don't want to say like you're going to overload the athlete with a lot of weight. We go really light. And we're talking body weight exercises at first. And then we might move them on to 5 or 8 pound dumbbells. So it's not heavy weight. It's all about getting their technique locked in. And that's the whole purpose of training a young athlete. It's not to get them bigger or stronger. They don't have enough endocrine development or hormone development at that point to even grow muscle really, or to get that much stronger. The whole point is to improve their body mechanics, so that when they become a teenager, they've set the foundation so that they are building strength and muscle on a good foundation.
So Joel, there was a book written a couple years ago called The Sports Gene, I think, by David Epstein, and it talks about nature versus nurture. And so, I mean, as our parents are listening to this, they're having to make decisions on where they spend their resources. I mean, obviously, there's folks who are just born as gifted athletes. How much can you improve someone's athletic performance, do you think? And I'm not asking for a scientific answer, but you've got people that are just born, they're able to, or more explosive, but is there some kind of typical percentage against the baseline that you can improve someone with this type of training?
I think it depends what specific biomotor capability we're looking at. If we're looking at speed and power, I would say that's one that maybe is bit more genetically predisposed to the athlete. Doesn't mean we can't improve it tremendously. What that percentage is does vary a little bit. Some athletes do respond better to training. They have a little bit more untapped potential, if you will. When they start training, it's like, whoa, they just take off. So what that percentage is, it's tough to say whether it's 20% for an athlete, whether it's 40%, depends maybe what their background is. If they've never touched weights, they've never had a correct training regimen, then if they do all of a sudden start participating in a good training protocol, like, wow, their numbers are going to take off. But I would say that the power element, the speed component, and maybe reaction time as well, those things are a little bit more genetically kind of grooved early on, just based on their gene pool. Muscularity, maybe mobility, stability for sure, balance, body control, alignment, posture, symmetry. Those are more subtle things that we might not think about as being as important, but in reality, they are important, especially for longevity and for health. So I think those things we can improve tremendously. And that's one of the things that we've seen with our athletes. And that's where we take athletes and they basically avoid injury. We have a very high percentage of athletes returning to play and never having to deal with those injuries again. And we're talking some pretty severe injuries. Even, Jeff, we were talking earlier about some of the different softball players I've worked with. Well, some of these athletes literally had broken backs when we started. And we didn't do anything fancy. So I don't want to make it sound like, oh, we took them through this ultra scientific, groundbreaking training protocol. That's the beauty of it. We didn't. It was super simple. And it was all about the foundations, all about the basics, all about, hey, let's get your posture locked in. Once they lock in their posture, let's get your squat locked in. Once they lock in their squat, let's add a little bit of weight, maybe 10-pound dumbbells. All of a sudden, after 2 or 3 weeks, the back pain that they had, they thought maybe they were going to have to get surgery on. All of a sudden, wow, my back feels great. Obviously, their spine didn't just heal, because this took like 6 months or a year for some of these individuals for their spine to actually heal. but it only took about 2 or 3 weeks for the pain to go away. So they were able to participate in their sport with technically a broken spine and pain-free, all because their muscle function was correct. So when athletes have, I've had this injury or that injury, it's like, you know what? If your muscles are functioning properly and they're protecting the injured sites, they're protecting the joints, the connective tissue, an athlete can do a lot more than you think if their muscles are doing their proper job. It's pretty cool to see, actually.
What's the number one injury that you see from young athletes?
That's a tricky one. I guess it depends on the sport. ACLs actually are becoming surprisingly common for young athletes, which like 5-10 years ago was much less common. I attribute that a little bit more to athletes strength training early on and doing strength training improperly. So in fact, I was having a conversation with some other coaches the other day, and all this high prevalence of injury among young athletes. It's kind of crazy because when I was a kid growing up, like you didn't see these type of injuries.
No,
it was very rare. And I 100% agree and believe that it's because athletes are strength training at such a young age and they're doing it with incorrect form. I 100% believe that.
So maybe this is a loaded question, but
Yeah.
So should they back off and wait till an older age to do it, or do they just need to learn how to do it the right way?
It's a combination, because to do it the right way, they inevitably have to back off the load. I mean, even for my pro athletes, we start them with incredibly light weights. They're almost like, wait, you're giving me 15-pound dumbbells? Like I can squat 500 pounds. It's like, well, show me a good squat with 15 pounds and we'll go up. And all of a sudden they're shaking. Yeah. They're like, why is this so hard? It's like, because you're doing it right. We just eliminated compensation patterns that your body likes to rely on. We're forcing those dormant muscles to all of a sudden wake up. And I've seen this. It happens almost every time. My pro athletes, okay, I'm not talking young athletes. I'm talking pro athletes, NFL players. They're literally shaking and sweating with 15, 20-pound dumbbells. And they're like, why is this happening? I'm like, because we're starting to fix your body.
Doing it the right way.
Exactly. So, but that requires us to really decrease the load initially. The cool thing is it actually opens up the door so they can go heavier in a few months usually, because they're starting to build the right foundation. And all of a sudden, athletes that used to say, oh man, we can't go past 3 plates on squats because it hurts my knees, hurts my low back. A month or two later, it's like, wow, my knees and low back feel great. Let's put 4 plates on. And they can do it, no pain. So that's how if you want to talk long-term success, which is the end game for every athlete, again, it's all about technique, all about body mechanics. I sound like a broken record when I say that, and my athletes will say the same thing. I'm always talking about this because it's that important. So
I remember in high school, with football, I mean, we max bench, your back's arched, man, you do it all. And I remember going to spring training with the Braves the first year to the minor league camp, and I got in there and I think I'd put like double plates and all this and started doing it. That guy, the strength guy, looked at me like I was the biggest idiot. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But I agree with it. I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot of, like you said, is with younger kids getting hurt, but it's not training the right way.
Exactly.
And it's almost, I think, like you said, almost don't train. Just let your body naturally develop. If you're going to train, like you said, make sure you're doing it the proper way.
Exactly.
Or your body's going to fight you on it.
What about flexibility training? Pro athletes, whatever sport you're talking about, flexibility is kind of risen in terms of focus. And when should kids start working on flexibility, and how important is that?
Ooh, this is an interesting question. I'm going to take probably some heat from this, as I always do. I'm not a big fan of flexibility training. If you actually take most kids, they have plenty of flexibility. It's motor control and stability that they lack. So if you watch them go through movement patterns, they almost look like a wet noodle. They can bend over, touch their toes. They can squat deep. A lot of these kids can almost get in the splits. So do they need more flexibility, more mobility? No, they need better control of their body. And actually, it's similar but a bit more subtle even with pro athletes. A lot of athletes, they have enough flexibility. If they don't have proper stability and control of their body, what the nervous system does is it will shut down movement to protect itself. So you'll actually start losing mobility if you don't have proper stability and control of your body, because your body is basically going to say, whoa, I can't control this position. Well, guess what? I'm no longer going to let you do it because we're going to prevent you from getting injured. Well, that's how they really start losing mobility and flexibility. So when we improve motor control, we improve stability, we improve their alignment, what ends up happening is their mobility and their flexibility, it's optimized. I don't want to say it's maximized, it's optimized. That's a big difference. We don't want maximal flexibility. Too much flexibility can hinder an athlete. There's actually a lot of research showing that stretching can actually slow down an athlete. They can actually lose power, they can lose force production, and it can actually make them more prone to injury if they do too much of it, because the muscles are no longer playing their optimal role of absorbing force. That's really one of the key things that our muscles do besides produce motion. They absorb force, they absorb impact. Well, stretching makes the muscle kind of go into this weak and flaccid state where they can't absorb and produce as much force. Well, guess what? Not only are you sacrificing power, you're sacrificing your ability to protect your joints. So with that said, it's all about optimizing quality of movement. So when it comes to flexibility and mobility, there's such a thing as not enough range of motion and too much range of motion. We want to find that balance. And that's why I train a lot of our athletes at our facility with 90-degree joint angles, because when we look at a lot of sports, most of what we see is in those 90-degree positions, or what's called the moderately stretched position, not the excessively stretched position. So, and it depends a little bit on the sport, but that's kind of the general principle that we go by.
So Joel, I guess mainly before puberty, I guess, what are 3 exercises that kids can do at home themselves before they start to get into a really, intense routine of working out? Can you recommend like 3 exercises, body weight exercises, I guess they could do themselves?
Probably the single most important one that I have all my athletes do is a perfect posture hold standing on one leg. They have to be able to do that for me to be able to move them on to other things, because they don't have proper posture. Well, guess what? The foundation for everything else is missing. And then they need to be able to do that while holding balance and stability on one leg, and basically showing me that they have good symmetry on both sides of the body. And then we can start loading them up a little bit more. And you'd be surprised how many athletes struggle with that. They can stand on one leg, but they're oftentimes compensating, and one hip is rotated out, their shoulders are slouched, their hips are collapsed. Well, if I can get them into good postural mechanics, standing on one leg with their feet totally straight, then we'll progress them to doing the same thing, eyes closed. And that really challenges their stability. After that, doing a body weight squat, just mastering that with their feet straight, their posture locked in, just going to roughly 90 degrees. I'd rather have the athlete actually stop a little short and keep good alignment than going too deep and sacrifice alignment. And then probably the last exercise I'd have them do is not even a push-up, just holding the top of a push-up. Because most athletes, you have them do some push-ups, they're in a horrible position, their heads drop, their hips are collapsed, they're using all their traps in their neck. Well, I need to be able to get their plank position essentially corrected before I can have them do a push-up. So just holding the top of a plank or the top of a push-up with their core locked in, not letting their hips sag, working on perfect alignment, looking for that straight line from basically their heels all the way up to their head. And then once they can do those 3 things, I think, we've built a little bit of a foundation so we can progress them.
I'm looking at Brett here. Your posture is awful right now.
My posture is awful.
Brett,
I was going to get Jeff, Brad maybe to jump down and demonstrate.
Well, I mean, I was going to see if you wanted to do the standing on one leg with your eyes closed to see kind of what your core strength looks like.
I actually do want to ask you about stability. You keep talking about stability. So tell our audience, why is stability so important for an athlete?
Because that's really how we control our body. When it comes to any sport, you can have a ton of power, you can have a ton of explosiveness and speed, but it's all about harnessing that power and harnessing that control and harnessing that speed. If they can't do that, then it's basically power gone wild, where it's just like, well, I can't control it. And that's how injuries happen. So, I'd rather have an athlete that's maybe genetically a little less explosive, but teach them how to do it properly. And they're going to be faster than an athlete who has amazing genetic potential for power, but just has no control and stability over their joints. So, and this all comes back to alignment and basically positioning. A squat that has proper positioning is going to be a squat where they have good stability around their joints, and a squat where their muscles are firing properly. And it's also a squat that's going to positively transfer into other areas of their performance. So stability and joint alignment and positioning, those are they kind of go hand in hand, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that. Because think about how many guys, just from baseball standpoint for me, that, look, man, they had great bodies. They were strong, like you talked about, great power, but they were never healthy. They couldn't stay on the field.
Exactly.
And I tell kids that all the time at a young age. If you can't stay healthy, you're no good to the coach at the end of the day, right? Like, no matter how good you look, you got to be able to be out there. So I got one more question for me on, because I laugh. It's become like a thing in baseball, the earthing and seeing people walk barefoot around. Do y'all see some of that with the barefoot training? Because I remember being up, in the booth looking out, and I'd see some starting pitchers walking around barefoot and working out. I'm like, what is going on?
You promote it.
I do promote the earthing thing.
Yeah, that's more mental.
I don't know if it's mental. I don't want to. To be honest, I haven't done enough research on the term of what earthing really is. I know being connected to the ground and the energy and all that. And
I'm not gonna say who, but one pitcher I saw do it last year, and he gave up 7 runs in the inning in a third. So I want to say you might want to change that up.
Yeah,
promote the barefoot.
But that barefoot component. So I don't know as much, and I think there's less we know scientifically about the whole element of what earthing really is and being connected to the ground and whatnot. But activating the feet in a barefoot scenario is absolutely, and we should have probably talked about this earlier, because basically every athlete I train, they're taking their shoes off or they're wearing barefoot shoes. We're not wearing traditional shoes. Traditional shoes act like a crutch where the muscles of their feet and ankles can kind of go dormant. And if the muscles of their feet and ankles aren't firing properly, every standing exercise will be incorrect to varying degrees, because activation starts with your contact point, and your contact point to the ground is your feet. And most athletes, their feet are, I'm going to say it, they're garbage. It's like a pile of mush. They don't know how to activate their feet. And then if we can get them barefoot, start having them do basic foot and ankle exercises, which starts with the single leg stand. Have them do that barefoot. All of a sudden, those toes start opening up and start spreading. Their arches start popping back up. A lot of athletes come to me and be like, hey, coach, I got flat arches. Like, well, guess what? Flat arches is like bad posture. You're not stuck with that the rest of your life. Maybe genetically you're more predisposed to having slightly worse posture or slightly flatter feet. That doesn't mean you can't change it. We can get our athletes to pop their arches up in about 5 minutes. Now, it takes a lot longer than that to get those arches to stay popped up when they're on the playing field. So it's constantly activated and their feet are constantly engaged, but we can get their arches to pop up in just a few minutes just from doing some basic exercises with their feet and keeping their alignment. If your feet rotate out when you're doing an exercise and they're just like mush on the ground, your arches are going to stay flat. But if you can really get your feet to be straight, you can get your posture stacked, and then you tell the athlete, hey, squeeze down with your feet, grip the floor, push those ankles and knees out just a little bit, all of a sudden their arches start popping. It's like, whoa. And then they start feeling their hips and glutes engage. Now we can get them squatting. But if they can't do that, then like, okay, I'm not going to put 300 pounds in their back, because you're basically just loading the joints.
My foot's been mush for 40 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So in your, first of all, I want to give a little bit of plug to your social media. You're talking about a lot of stuff here, and gosh, we could talk for 2 hours and people would still be wanting to peel back the onion and understand what you're saying and how to do some of these things. You're on Instagram, you're posting stuff, every day. And I've gone out and looked at it. It's great stuff. Mm-hmm. And you really go into a lot of detail and give a lot of examples on how to do different things. So I would encourage you in our audience, if some of these things are resonating with you, to go check out their website, to go check out his Instagram page. Tell people what your website is, how to find that.
Yeah, it's just advancedhumanperformance.com. That's where a lot of our material is. There's hundreds of free articles on there. You don't have to buy a thing. It's not good for my business to say that, but really, no one really needs to buy anything. They can if they'd like to, but there's enough free content on there that really you can learn everything you need to just from my website. And then I'm on Instagram and all the other social media platforms. But I guess the last thing I would say for athletes is focus on posture, focus on alignment, because that sets the foundation for everything. And when you do that, it's really tough to screw up an exercise. And if you don't do that, it's almost impossible to do any exercise correctly. So focus on posture, focus on alignment, and then the technique will be there. And that's what you need to emphasize when you're training.
Sounds great.
Stuff.
Man, you know, you hear all this now, and I'm like, why didn't I have some of this?
You still be playing.
Well, I don't know if I'd still be playing, but I could eat another year or two out probably, you know? So, man, that's great stuff. We appreciate it, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, like I said, it's fun to do these for me too, because it's just, you know, parents, you can listen to athletes, what they've done, but then you start to, you know, well, how do I get my athlete to a better spot? And I love all that stuff you talked about, especially with posture, alignment, because I agree. We see kids do exercises wrong all the time. And now looking back, I know I did them half the time, probably wrong, but I think that's a huge way to prevent injury. I think that's the other thing that, you know, people forget is that, yeah, you want to, you know, do heavy, you get stronger, but that doesn't always mean better.
Yeah.
Can I ask one last question here? How do you make this fun for kids where they want to get in the gym and they want to do this stuff?
You know, I used to say, hey, we need to make it fun for kids. And then I've kind of changed my thought process on that. It doesn't need to be brutal, and it doesn't need to be, you know, torture and being the drill sergeant mode, but it needs to be challenging and rewarding, and also mentally engaging. And they need to see the value of it, because when they do that, they're going to want to keep doing it. Fun, honestly, strength training can't compete with going out in the playground and being with their friends. So at the end of the day, I don't think we need to focus on fun, as we need to make it effective, and they need to see the benefit of it. So just doing it right.
That's a great answer. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, that's right.
He corrected it for you. We're thinking about maybe replace Britt with the doctor.
Yeah, we see that. Yeah. I mean,
well, thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. And thanks, Doc, for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.